Hello, hello! Welcome back to Brenda's Books. I hope in this crazy world that you are safe and happy in your homes, and I hope that today this story can take you away from all that for a little bit. Today we are on part 3 of Dad, Thad, and My Skateboard, and this is one of my favorite sections. Here we go. My teeth chattered in the freezing water as I clung to a rope behind Connor's speedboat, with my feet pushing against a wakeboard. Connor pulled me ever so slightly. Chrissy was right. The drag in the water from my shorts was bad. But if the boys worked with it all the time, so could I. "Remember," Thad called, "toes higher than heels, knees to chest, sit over the board." I repeated what Thad said over and over in my head. Finally, I called, "Hit it!" and Connor hit the gas. Immediately, the rope ripped out of my hands. Well, that was anticlimactic, I muttered out loud. Connor turned the boat around while the entire group called things like, "You'll get it next time, don't worry." I was surprised by this. Jace's friends would have been mocking me relentlessly for what happened. I got in position again, but this time I held onto the handlebars with all my might. All that did was thrust me forward, and I plowed face first into the water. After the boat circled around again, Thad called, "Push against the wakeboard with your legs and just stand up." "Oh, sure," I called back. "I'll just stand up. Piece of cake." They all chuckled at that. "You got this," said Thad. "All right," I said out loud to myself. "Stand up on the wakeboard." This time I pushed my legs with all my might. I could see and hear the group in the boat cheering loudly for me. And before I knew it, I was standing above the water. But somehow my balance was wrong, and I toppled over to one side and crashed into the lake. "So much for third time's the charm," I mumbled. Again, I expected the group to be mocking me, but instead they were yelling, "You did it! You got up!" They were clapping. Even Chrissy looked happy for me. How odd. But the praise felt good, and I couldn't help grinning. So I tried again and again, determined to stay up longer. But each time I tumbled over to one side or the other. Just when I was about to give it a rest, Thad jumped in the water and swam over to me. Connor threw him a second rope and another wakeboard. "What are you doing?" I asked. "Is it safe to have 2 ropes?" "Oh yeah, I'll make sure we don't collide heads," Thad said with a grin. "Here, try to copy what I'm doing, and I'll see if I can figure out what's wrong." I let out an enormous sigh. "This is so embarrassing," I mumbled. "Why are you embarrassed?" Thad asked. "You're doing great. A lot better than I did on my first day." Although I didn't really believe that, it did make me feel a teeny bit better. So I grabbed my handlebars again, but this time I couldn't get my feet back into the attached rubber boots. Every time I tried, the wakeboard would pop up to the surface and splash me in the face. So much for not being embarrassed. "It's really hard to get your feet back in, isn't it?" Thad said. He left his wakeboard to float in the water and swam to my side. He held both of our ropes in one hand, so both of my hands could be free. Even still, I would tip to one side and have to let go of the wakeboard to tread water. Thad held my waist with his other hand to keep me upright. I didn't want to admit it, but I liked his touch. Finally, I got my feet in the boots. His hand lingered on my waist longer than it needed to before he handed me the rope's handlebars. He swam back to his wakeboard and slipped his feet into the boots with no problem. "All right," Thad said. "You ready to try again?" I nodded. "Put it in gear, Connor," Thad called. The boat began to drag us slowly. I wobbled a bit, but managed to steady myself. "Well, your position looks good," said Thad. "Say hit it whenever you're ready." "Hit it!" I called. Connor hit the gas, and Thad and I both stood up on our wakeboards. Thad shifted his board so one foot was in front of the other, and I immediately crashed. I came up for air, and Thad was right next to me. "Nice," he said. "You stayed up longer that time." In response, I coughed up the water I had swallowed. "You're doing great," Thad exclaimed. I stared at his dripping face. The cold seemed to bring out the blue in his eyes. "You know, this would be a lot easier if you were uglier," I told him. "What?" Thad laughed. Thankfully, Bryce threw me the rope at that moment, so I had an excuse to turn away from him. But I'm pretty sure he saw my face redden, because in the corner of my eye I could see him fighting a smile. "All right, I think I know what it is," said Thad. "Since you're so light, you might need to lean back more than you are. This will help you when your feet need to shift positions." I grinned at him. "You sound like a real teacher." Thad smirked. "Put us in gear, Connor." We started to drag in the water again. I put my knees to my chest so they were pretty much touching my life jacket. "That looks good," said Thad. He held onto his handlebars with one hand. I didn't know why he was doing this, but I couldn't help noticing how the muscles in his shoulder and arm bulged. It was only then that I realized my own arms were shaking from the cold. "Say hit it when you're ready," Thad told me. "Hit it!" Once again, Connor stepped on the gas, and with his free hand, Thad managed to give my board the proper weight it needed for me to shift it into the correct position. He looked like he was practically drowning in the water, but he still held on. Figures. "There you go, you got it! Keep the pressure a bit more in the back." I did what he said, and I could feel the difference. I felt balanced on the wakeboard. I squealed with delight, and Thad laughed, now bringing himself up to his own rightful position. The wind blew my loose strands of hair behind my face, and I grinned as I glided over the water. My other new friends in the boat were cheering me on with their fists pumping up and down. "Look at you!" Thad called. "You just stay right there and I'm going to do some stuff." And before I knew it, Thad's rope was going over my head as he boarded behind me, in and out of the wake. I felt a little ridiculous being the one just hanging on, while he did all sorts of stunts around me. But I loved it at the same time. Thad was incredible, and he made all sorts of funny sound effects with each move he made. Every time he passed behind me, he would say something different. "Coming through!" Or, "Wow, look at that girl, she's killing it!" And sometimes he would just whistle at me. I probably would have laughed at him a lot more than I did if I hadn't been concentrating so hard on staying balanced and upright. Then a massive trawler boat passed by us, causing large rolling waves. They looked like watery monsters coming to swallow me whole. In fright, I dropped the handlebars and sank into the water. I reached the surface just in time to see Thad gliding over a wave with ease, catching a huge amount of air. Then he let go of his rope and did a flip before landing in the water. I laughed out loud as everyone in the boat cheered. How crazy! When I climbed into the boat again, my legs were shaking from the exertion in freezing water. Bryce handed me a towel. Even though Thad had put on a professional show, everyone in the boat was most excited for me. Even Chrissy was giving me high fives. I couldn't believe it. What a strange day it was. I don't even remember the last time I felt so happy. The drive home kind of killed my wonderful mood, mostly because Dad was still in a bad one. I looked through my side view mirror as we curved around the canyon roads, staring back at the lake for as long as I could see it. I was already excited to go wakeboarding the next day with my new friends. I could tell Chrissy had really made an effort to be nice to me. I made a mental note to do the same for her tomorrow. "I hope I didn't ruin the rest of your day," Dad said. "Nah, I had a great day," I countered. "I'm glad to hear that." My dad paused for a long moment, then said, "Look, Stace, I should have told you about my job, but I thought your mom already did. I've been in this position for over a year." I shrugged. I didn't really care. I had gotten used to knowing nothing about him a long time ago. This must not have been the response that Dad wanted, because he scowled and looked out his side window. What did you want me to say?" I asked him. "I don't know," Dad said. "Anything. Tell me why your day was so great." Just then, we turned into Dad's crowded, fairly wealthy neighborhood. Grandma's house must have been the first one built, because it seemed to be the only one that wasn't huge. I thought about what to tell Dad as we curved through the subdivision's wide streets. It wasn't until we reached his driveway that I thought of something. "Well, right now my day is great because Grandma makes way better dinners than I do." I hopped out of the truck, slammed the door, and ran inside. "That lasagna was great, Grandma," I said, as I dipped a dirty baking pan into a sink full of soapy water. "Well, thank you, dear," Grandma said. "Oh, was that the doorbell?" "Yeah, it was," I said. "Is Dad expecting someone?" "I don't know," Grandma said, looking toward the front room as my dad got up from the sofa to answer the door. Suddenly, Grandma dropped a plate, and it shattered all over the floor. "Oh, dear," she moaned. I grabbed 2 brooms from the closet next to the refrigerator. I handed one to Grandma, and we both began sweeping up the broken pieces. Then my dad walked into the kitchen. "Stacy, there's someone here for you." "Who is it?" I asked. "Thad Stanton." My heart fluttered into a rapid beat. I begged my face not to redden, but I don't think it listened to me. How do you know his last name? I asked. He never even told me. I know his family, Dad said. They live just a couple blocks away. My eyes bulged. Dad didn't know what to do with the fact that I was currently tongue-tied, so he just left the kitchen. Grandma elbowed me in the ribs. It would seem you were hoping it was this boy. I cocked my head as if this idea was ridiculous, but I knew my cheeks were giving me away. Grandma chuckled. You go on and speak with our guest. I'll clean this up. Thanks, Grandma. Although I secretly wanted to stay and help clean up, so that I could figure out what to say to Thad. Why was he here? I walked out into the tiny living room and saw Thad standing by the door, grinning from ear to ear. He wore a white t-shirt and long yellow shorts. His slightly shaggy hair didn't really look combed, but it still managed to look good. I hated that boys could get away with that. Hey, he said, I was just wondering if you wanted to go skateboarding. He lifted up a brown and yellow skateboard in his right hand. I put my hands on my hips. Are you as good at skateboarding as you are wakeboarding? Thad laughed. Probably not. Dad patted me on the shoulder and spoke in a low voice that was still loud enough for Thad to hear. Don't worry, he is. Thad chuckled. I don't know about that. I stared at Thad for a minute, not quite sure what to do. His tan skin looked even darker inside, which made his hair appear blonder and his eyes bluer. Thad cleared his throat when I didn't say anything. So, do you want to? Come back by dark, my dad ordered, as if I had already said yes. I took a deep breath. What was the big deal? It was just skateboarding, and I actually didn't suck at that. Why was I so nervous? Sure, sounds fun, I said. Let me grab my skateboard. I dashed into my bedroom. I snatched a hairbrush from my nightstand and brushed through my hair as quickly and as thoroughly as possible. I took a quick peek in the mirror and smoothed out my maroon tank top and jean shorts. Even with wearing sunscreen, all of my skin got slightly sunburned today. Oh well, I couldn't change that in 5 seconds. Hopefully I would tan somewhat this summer. I slipped on my white Adidas and grabbed my skateboard from under the bed. When I came back to the living room, I found Thad having a very polite conversation with Grandma. They both grinned at me as I entered. Ready? Thad said. Yep, let's go. We both rolled down the driveway and out onto the wide suburban streets, where we immediately started practicing our jumps and tricks. Dad was right. Thad was good. But he seemed to think that I was better because he kept asking me for tips. I showed him how Jace taught me to do an ollie north. With just a little bit of practice, he was pretty perfect at it. Then Thad had the idea to synchronize our tricks together. We tried to do this over and over, but one of us always messed something up. And although we couldn't have been that funny, everything seemed hilarious. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so uncontrollably giddy. After one particularly pathetic landing, Thad was laughing so hard that he lost his skateboard completely, and we had to chase it down the slightly slanted street. By the time we caught it, my giggles turned to silent laughter. This cracked Thad up so much that his booming laugh turned all the more throaty and echoed through the streets, causing everyone who was outside to look our way. Just then, a prissy blonde girl walked up to us, the same girl I ran into the day I got my skateboard. Hi, Thad, she said, her voice high and saturated with sweetness. Hey, Ashley, what's up? Who's your new friend? She said with false interest. Oh, this is Stacy. Isn't she awesome on the skateboard? Thad said with enthusiasm. Ashley's face froze with her fake smile. Yeah, she said with feigned delight. Real awesome. Then she turned her pretty pink self around and walked away. Thad grinned and leaned into me. That's the second girl you made jealous today. Congratulations. I smirked. Who are you, the neighborhood dream boy? Hey, if you weren't so gorgeous, nobody would care if I hung out with you. I blushed at his unexpected compliment, but Thad pretended not to notice. Come on, let's try this synchronized thing again. I know we can do it. We rolled down the slanted street together until we were exactly side by side. I'm counting down, I warned. 1, 2, 3. At that moment, we jumped up simultaneously and completed our ollie north with perfect synchronization. Yeah! We said in unison, which of course made us burst out laughing again. Thad raised his hand to give me a high five. I smacked it back. I can't believe you're good at everything, I told him, giving him a light punch in the shoulder. Holy cow, I cried. How did you get so solid? I playfully punched him several more times. Thad laughed out loud. Thanks, he said, turning slightly pink. He peered straight at me like he wanted to say something else, but he didn't. What? He shook his head. Nothing. So who taught you all those tricks with the skateboard? My boyfriend. His name's Jace. Thad's eyes widened. He cleared his throat. Oh, you have a boyfriend back home? Yeah. Thad nodded, avoiding my eyes. Where's that? Seattle. Thad raised his eyebrows. That's a long ways away. I shrugged. Yeah, but I'll be back after the summer. Thad nodded, glancing around the neighborhood now. And he knows I'm not the kind of girl he's going to have a summer fling, I continued. Thad nodded again. Of course. Why would anybody do that? Exactly. Thad took a deep breath. So tell me about him, he said, looking back at me. What? No way. I know the unwritten rule. Don't talk about guys in front of other guys. That's a rule? Thad said with disbelief. Because I'm pretty sure every girl I know has broken it. I know, girls do it to make the guy jealous. And I have no reason to do that to you. Besides, we don't have a thing, so it's not like you would be. Thad lifted his eyes to the sky. Right. He twirled his skateboard in circles on its nose. There's not a rule against talking to me if I ask, though, right? I smirk. So you want me to tell you all about how hot he is? Thad rolled his head. Oh, geez, definitely not. I laughed out loud. See? There's a reason the rule's in place. Thad hopped on his skateboard again and rolled along the sidewalk. I kept pace with him on the other side. Just tell me anything else, Thad said. Like, how old is he? 18. 18? Thad cried, glancing over at me. I shrugged. Yeah? How old are you? I'm 16. How old are you? I'm 16 too, Thad said. What do you guys like to do together? Skateboard. But I didn't have one at home, so he shared his with me. Okay, what else? And you can skip the making out stuff? I laughed at that. I don't know. Watch movies? Thad stopped short and flipped his skateboard up in his hand. What do you like to do? I stopped too and faced him, a little surprised by his question. It was true that I was always trying to get Jace to do more fun things with me, but he never really wanted to. If we weren't skateboarding, he just wanted to hang out. Well, I like climbing walls, but they only have the indoor kind where I live. Thad grinned and nodded, looking excited that I had said this. And? I shrugged. I like speech and debate. Yeah? Thad smiled. I bet you'd be really good at that. What else? He was looking at me intensely, like he actually wanted to know. It was weird. Jace never wanted to talk. All he wanted to do was, well, make out. Well, I used to like to swim. Used to? Yeah. I was on the swim team all through junior high. But then last year, Thad stared at me, widening his eyes, prodding me to finish. I shrugged. My parents split up and I just didn't want to anymore. Thad bit his lip and looked at the ground. I wanted to explain all the things that my parents had messed up, but it was impossible for anybody to understand, so I didn't try. Thad put his hand on the side of my shoulder and squeezed it. I'm sorry, he said softly. I put my other hand over his. Here he was, a guy I had only known for one day, and he was already saying the very words that I wish my dad would say to me, the words I had been longing for since he moved here last year. How hard was it to say I'm sorry? My eyes welled with tears. I clenched my teeth to fight them back, but it was no use. Thad rubbed my shoulders down to my elbows. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't know my questions would lead to something so personal. I shook my head. You don't have to apologize for being sweet. Thad lifted one corner of his mouth into a small smile. I blinked rapidly in hopes to push my tears back, but it only made them slip down my cheeks. Ugh. I wiped them away quickly. Hey, don't do that, Thad said. He slowly pulled me in close to him and gently stroked my back. My heart was hammering again. I wrapped my arms around him and rested my head against his solid chest. What was I doing? I thought about pulling away, but I held on just a little longer. Then I heard Thad whisper, "Dang it," under his breath. I pulled out of the embrace and stepped back to look at him. What's dang it? I asked. Thad shook his head. Never mind. No, tell me. What's dang it? He shook his head again. It's just that you have a boyfriend and I have to go. See you around, Stacy. And before I even had the chance to say goodbye, he was already on his skateboard and around the corner. But I think I knew what he was going to say, and I liked him too. And that concludes part 3. I hope you come back next week for part 4 of Dad, Thad, and My Skateboard. And as always, I hope you have a fantastic week. Until next time, take care.